So think of a method as enclosed statements or a group of statements that perform an operation. So a group of statement, an enclosed group of statements that do something. Let's go back and look at this brand new Java file that I created here. By the way, I went ahead and created a new one, new project, call it mmethods. By now you should know how to create a new project, so go ahead and do that. Now let's dissect at least a little bit what's going on when we look at our skeleton, Java class skeleton here created. Okay, this here, public static void main, and then we have some stuff inside of this parenthesis here, which we will talk about in a bit. Then we have these squiggly brackets here, right? So all of this inside, this would be these statements, the enclosed statements that we're talking about, which means the main is actually a method, okay? So anything we write inside here, it's its own entity per se, okay? You can create all the statements that we've seen before as we started learning about Java, statements that are enclosed inside of our main method here, which then can be called outside of our main method. But in this case, let's not go too much into technicality. I just want to show you that all along we've been using methods. Okay, this is a method. But also in some other languages they call them functions. So methods and functions, there are some differences. Essentially, they mean the same thing. Okay, just think of a method as a group of enclosed statements that perform an operation. As we start building bigger and more sophisticated applications, right, we will need to separate our code. Okay, we'll need to make our code a little bit more flexible and robust. And one of the things that Java and many other languages provide is this sense of breaking your code into smaller pieces. And then we can put all these pieces together to make an application, software. Okay, so think of also another way of thinking of a method. Just think of just a little block of code that you can enclose in a package per se, right? And then you do all of your computation, all of your statements, all of your logic, and then somewhere else you can call it to display or do what you need it to do. Okay, let's go ahead and do a little example here. So let's create a method here, okay? Here's a method. So how do we create a method? In Java, you say public, okay? Static, in this case. We'll talk more about that. Say void. Let's call this my name. There we go. As you can see, it's this syntax here, as we created this method, it's pretty similar to our main here. The main method, the entry point that comes already with our skeleton here class, right? It's got a few differences, but basically it's the same. So all you have to understand now is that every method has to have a name, because again, we will have to reference that name later. Okay, that's the whole idea of creating our methods, so that we can then call that method to display or do what it needs to do. Okay, so let's say here, okay, system print ln. Okay, let's say George. Okay, that's not my name. It's my father-in-law's name, but that works. So what do you think this method does here? What do you think this will do? Yes, exactly. It will print out the George. It print out George here. Okay, so let's save this and run. Okay, it ran, but we don't really see the system out George. What's going on? Well, turns out, as I mentioned earlier, the idea of having a method is so that we can use that method, the name of that method, and call it in our main, because this is where everything runs, right? So in order for us to be able to see this encapsulated code inside of our my_name method, right, we created it, but we're not calling. So in order for us to call it, we have to go ahead and say my_name, or say my_name like that, and save. So now we're calling our my_name method we just created here. And notice we have our parentheses that signifies we have a method. Okay, so if we save this and run, we should see George. So we can go ahead and create a different method here if we want it. So we can say public static void another method, the system difficulties print ln, save that, run. Right, you're right, you probably noticed right away. Well, it's not showing because again we have to call it. So here we can say another method, there it is, IntelliSense, just hit enter, and there we go. If you save this, we should have George, another method, because now it's just reading the first call, which has George, the second one has another method. Now the idea of having these methods is so that we have some sort of independent entity. Fair to say that we have to have some sort of data to work with inside the method. What I'm trying to say is methods can be void in this case, which means they don't return anything, right? We're not returning anything out of here, we're just printing things out. But also we can return something, return either a string, a boolean, a character, whatever we want to return, we actually can return something from a method. So with methods, we can also pass in parameters, return something back to us. So for instance, what if I wanted to make sure that this myName method here actually returned a name that we pass in inside here? Passing parameters means we can pass in quote-unquote variables throughout our method that can be used inside here, right? So inside here we can go say it's string, so we're passing a parameter of type string, and we can say myName, okay? Now, what would happen here, this would say, well, this public static void, this myName method here, has this string parameter it needs to be passed in. Inside here, we can now, instead of just putting George, we can just pass in this myName, because again, this parameter is just like a variable, right? Which means now here we have a problem. Okay, it says myName, string, and main cannot be applied to an empty parameter function. That's what's happening here. So what it's saying, the moment we pass in something, the system, it's a contract. The system now knows to say, well, this method here, whatever we want to use it, it has to receive, it has to pass in something inside of it for it to work. So it's a contract, which means here we have to pass in a string. And look at that, it even gives us what kind of string, what kind of items we should pass. Let's say George. In fact, let's do this. Let's say mName, just like that, just to see, differentiate a few things here. Okay, so there we go. So myName is the name of the method, and then mName George, so it's saying the type of our parameter is going to be string. So now if we save this, and remember we are printing it out, so whatever we're passing in here as a parameter, it will be printed out. Okay, so save this and run, we should see George again. So nothing really changed in terms of our output, but we know something really actually changed because now it's more dynamic, which means now we can go ahead here and say Paulo, for instance, and save. And it's going to go ahead and reflecting here, it says Paulo. Okay. Now this one here is a void, and also it's just we're passing strings. So we could have said, for instance, public static add numbers, okay, int a, and then int b. This is just an example. So now what we can do, we can go ahead and say, well, system.out.println, we can just say a plus b. If we go ahead here and say add nums, notice now we have to pass, there's that contract, and it tells us, the ID tells us we have to pass in integer, right, and an integer. So we have to pass in two integers. Let's say 4 and 5. Save this. If you run, we should see 9. There we go, 9. And guess what? We know enough about concatenation now. We can say sum, okay, save this and run, sum 45. Haha. This is the problem. With the moment we have string concatenating with integers, and this plus here then becomes more of adding those two numbers as in concatenating him, glue them together. So obviously sum is not going to be 45 of 4 plus 5. So we know how to solve this. Just put it inside of parentheses. And then of course we have to add our plus there just to make sure we are actually concatenating the result with the string here. Okay, so get space, sum 9, okay? In fact, let's make it much more beautiful there. Space there, and equal sign, space there, save, and run. There we go. Nothing really changed, just a little bit of cosmetics, if you will. Alright? Perfect. So now you've learned a lot here. You've learned that you can create methods. So methods are just a group of enclosed statements that perform an action. In this case, we can have a method, an empty method, right? So that you don't have to insert anything, you don't have to use any parameters. This one here, we just called another method, and we're just printing out another method. Very simple. But also we can pass in parameters. We can pass in variables or data, so that when we go inside of our method, we can then do the logic as we wish. As you can see here, we passed in integers, 2 integers, and then we took those 2 parameters and we added them together here, and then we got a result. Now you notice the difference here is that it's so much simpler and cleaner and very manageable to see. Now we just call my name and pass in name, and then that's it. We are adding a little bit of an abstraction to our coding style here. Very, very, very little, right? We're not deep down there yet, but you can see how the flow, how things starting to change as we learn more about functions and methods in Java. Go ahead and play around with this concept, and I know it's really fun because I love this stuff, and I'm sure you do too. Just go ahead and play around, and don't be shy. You won't break anything. If you do, try to fix it. If you have questions, just ask those questions in the forum, and we'll be happy to help you, okay? All right, I'll see you in the next video.